Welcome, everyone. We'll begin in about 1 or 2 minutes, so you can find your seats. So a very warm welcome to the second part of our Laing lecture series this year, 2026, Faith-Based Ethics in a World of Powerful AI. Welcome back if you were here with us last night, and welcome for the first time if you're joining us new. Last night we were introduced to the Delta framework, and tonight we get to hear our speaker elaborate on the dignity part of that framework with the lecture, The Dignity of Work and the Dignity of Learning. So these topics are very near to my heart as I teach in the area of marketplace theology. And of course, Regent was founded to equip the whole people of God to express their faith through work in the marketplace. So it's great to have a treatment of work tonight, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I'd also like to echo the thanks that Paul gave last night to Roger Laing and the Laing family for their support of the Laing Lecture Series. It's been tremendous to have your vision and support in the work of Marketplace Ministry, so thank you again. A few quick announcements to begin. Our schedule tonight is as follows. Dr. Sullivan will speak for 60 minutes. And when I say 60 minutes, last night I took a rules-based approach, which didn't work, so tonight will be a virtue-based model. I read the Claude Constitution on your request, and you can see it as a trellis rather than a cage, so don't be too bound by it. After Dr. Sullivan's lecture, we'll have a formal response from Regent faculty member Jens Zimmerman and a live Q&A for both our in-person and our online guests. So as the talk goes on, if you have questions you want to formulate, you can think about sharing those with us later. For those of you joining us in person, the session is being live streamed and recorded under the conditions that are spelled out on the notice on the door. And please silence all electronic devices. Now to introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Megan Sullivan, as I said last night, is the Wilsey Family College Professor of Philosophy at the University of Notre Dame, where she is also director of a university-wide ethics initiative and a founding director of the Institute for Ethics and the Common Good. Last night I highlighted her publications and her work of institution building, so tonight I want to focus on her work of teaching. As we heard last night, Dr. Sullivan has developed a course at Notre Dame called God and the Good Life. What she didn't tell you is that this course is wildly popular. She's taught this course for a decade now, during which time she's accompanied thousands of students in developing a philosophical plan for their lives. She's also collaborated with faculty in other departments to offer innovative courses on the NBC show The Good Place, Tom Brown's Fashion Empire, and my personal favorite, Ted Chiang's Science Fiction. So it's not all Aristotle in the department. Dr. Sullivan has been honored with one of Notre Dame's Joyce Awards for teaching and the Provost's All-Faculty Team Award, not a surprise to us who heard her speak last night. Briefly, her own educational journey includes degrees from distinguished schools, including the University of Virginia, University of Oxford, and Rutgers. So again, by professional expertise and training, she's our expert of choice for this year's Laing Lectures. Here to give her second lecture, The Dignity of Work and the Dignity of Learning, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Megan Sullivan.
You came back. That was very brave. Or some of you didn't know what you were getting into. It's so wonderful to see you all. I'm so grateful to the Laing family and to President Spilsbury and all of the faculty and students at Regent for what has just been an absolutely wonderful visit for me this week. They did everything from arranging constant meals and coffee to also arranging unseasonably warm and sunny Vancouver weather, which really their powers know no limits. And I've been so grateful for the opportunity. Last night, I introduced you guys to the Delta framework, which, if you'll recall, delta is a mnemonic for 5 ideas that are central to Christian anthropology and are also deeply relevant to debates that we're having about artificial intelligence. I don't know if my slides just died. Do we want to take another shot up with the... All right. We can go for a second with that. If you remember... Oh, wait. Quiz. Audience quiz. Who wants to earn some points? Can anybody tell me what the 5 letters are? Anyone who was here last night? All right. Let's go in the back. Will you shout them out?
Dignity, embodiment, love, transcendence, and agency.
Oh my gosh, 10 points. 10 points to Gryffindor for correct answer. Wonderful. And so this is meant to be a mnemonic that, one, just like reminds us of 5 big ideas, especially if we're communicating to people who are maybe not aware of Christian anthropology or don't know about this tradition in ethics, to communicate 5 of these big ideas very directly, but also 5 kind of hopeful ideas about where Christian virtue ethics can start to weigh in on really concrete, pressing, timely debates around artificial intelligence. And tonight, we were very abstract. Yesterday, we were talking about some really big philosophical and theological ideas, and we were talking about the last 120 years in world history. We're going to keep those philosophical fires burning tonight, but I also want to provoke us to think really, really directly about our lives in the year 2026. And in particular, the personal singularities that we and many of our loved ones are experiencing around how AI is changing the workplace and how it's changing schools and universities. And hopefully everyone in this audience is touched by one or the other of those institutions in some way. And my goal, my ambitious goal for tonight, is to try to demonstrate to you that Christian communities have a really interesting point of view to offer in these debates, and that it would be very wise of us to start leaning into those debates now. So I'm going to make my case for what Christians have to offer to debates about the future of the workforce and the future of colleges and universities, and how those two are actually related. I promised David, going to stop talking in 54 minutes so that we can have a genuine conversation tonight. And just give me a signal. Give me the when it's time. And I promise I will stop. So we're going to focus in on D. Tonight's D night. If you guys had invited me for 4 additional days, you would get the rest of this. But tonight we're focusing on dignity, which is probably one of the most important. It's the one that grounds the rest of this. If you recall from last night, in the Christian tradition, every single person has inalienable value merely because they were born and made in the image and likeness of God. And your value as a person, anyone's value as a person, has nothing to do with how productive they are, how intelligent they are, where intelligence is understood as the ability to solve abstract problems. It doesn't have anything to do with how creative you are, even if that's something that you very much treasure in yourself. But if we think of creativity as your ability to make things and put them out into the world, that's a beautiful thing that you can do, but that's not where your value ultimately lies. If you lost those capabilities, if they were diminished in any way, it would not matter. You would still have what it takes to matter. And that is the core idea about the human life that grounds much of the rest of practical Christian ethics. As I mentioned last night, this, maybe felt a bit tautological or obvious before, but is not feeling that way for large segments of the population. And one of the reasons for that, I think, though I'd love to debate this with you guys this evening, is we, in the last 10 years, have become singularly obsessed with AI's capabilities, and in particular, the ways that software can outperform human beings along various dimensions. So it was shocking to realize over a decade ago that now AI could beat any human grandmaster in chess or in the game of Go. When AI could finally beat our very best chess and Go players, we were like, Terminator 2, it's coming. And then we've just continued to clear these abstract benchmarks. Now there are lists of unsolved problems in mathematics and basic science that large models are now able to make progress on, that even entire teams of human scientists, the very best human scientists, have not been able to make breakthroughs on. That's truly astonishing. It's astonishing to live in an era where we have software that has those capabilities. But one of the core things that we just have to keep in the very front of our minds as Christians as we approach this era is that we do not believe, nor have we ever believed, that the value of any individual human being's life depended on their ability to play chess or Go or to solve mathematical problems or to be economically productive in certain ways. That is just not what we care about. And that's going to be very important because we're increasingly going to be stating that ethical truth in the midst of a culture that thinks capabilities are everything. Because our self-image is just how much we are able to compete with software. There are two really specific applications of Christian teachings about human dignity that I think are particularly relevant to debates that we're having about artificial intelligence in the year 2026. One is the Christian teaching about the role that work should play in the lives of somebody that has this form of human dignity. Like, what role should work play in our lives? That's a topic that if you read Harvard Business Review, which is basically Cosmo magazine for capitalists, if you read HBR like I do, you get it in the airport every other month, it costs $20. Most of the articles are about trying to find appropriate work-life balance either for yourself or for the people that you manage. Like, this is a topic that broader society is absolutely fascinated with. This is a topic that the Christian community has been weighing in on pretty significantly since the dawn of capitalism. You know, Max Weber, the great German sociologist, wrote The Protestant Ethic in the Spirit of Capitalism, literally trying to explain how certain kinds of ideas about the good life and your destiny and your dignity could influence the ways that you approach trading your time for a wage in the market. It was, a genius work. Christians have been weighing in on this debate about the meaning of work in the good life for quite some time, and guess what? We have a whole lot to draw from in that tradition as we start to think about what our work means in the era of powerful artificial intelligence. So I want to talk about that tonight. But, and this is where you might want to just storm out of this lecture hall, I've never actually had a real job. I'm a college professor. I bagged groceries at Harris Teeter for a few summers. I was a camp counselor for a while. But I just went straight through grad school and then into academia. So one, caveat emptor, do not take work-life advice or like labor advice from a woman who has never once had a job that lasted more than 2 months that was like a real job. But being a professor is a real job in certain ways. But it's a very, very, very distinctive way of participating in capitalism. I do feel confident, however, talking about a little niche of the market that is near and dear to my heart, and this is what I want us to also spend some time on tonight, is it's a topic that I don't think the church has coined this phrase yet, but I hope that it will. I offer this to Pope Leo if he wants it. I'm sure he's watching this at Castel Gandolfo. This is a concept that I'm going to coin called the dignity of learning. And this is the church's teaching about the dignity of work applied to those of us who work in environments like universities and schools that are oriented around this very human task of learning. So I want to make a pitch tonight that, AI is right now being especially disruptive to these educational institutions, but also that we have a wonderful tradition that we can tap into of thinking about the dignity of learning that can perhaps help us guide each other and our institutions through this really difficult transition. So that's going to be the plan for tonight, and I promise I'm not going to go over on time. Another magazine I read a lot of magazines. I fly through airports a lot. I love The Atlantic. If you guys picked up The Atlantic last month, the headline of the issue was about dire forecasts about unemployment in the next few years because of widespread enterprise adoption of artificial intelligence. And this was an incredible cover. And the live version, if you logged onto their website, was even better. They had this evil AI alien walking around blowing up buildings, like blowing up your jobs. And then these two cartoons in the foreground, if you can't read it, the lady says, on the other hand, I've never been more productive. So you've got this worker who's like feeling like she has completely mastered her job now that she's able to enhance her skills and expertise with AI that she's using. And then in the background, of course, the joke is that like everything is on fire and the alien's going to get her pretty soon as well. And this definitely captures a certain vibe, as my students say, that is happening in the economy right now, which is like, on the one hand, many of us, raise your hand if you are using AI in your job or the thing that you do 8 hours a day that feels like your job. Yeah, many of us feel like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like, I feel like I've got a little bit of superpower. Maybe my boss is forcing me to learn how to use a little bit of superpower. But on the flip side, we also are able to take this macroeconomic outlook and say, there's no way that our economy can exist in its current form if this type of productivity is possible from something that is not a human worker, that requires rest or wages or anything resembling the limitations of an ordinary human laborer. So that's a moment that we're in, and one of the greatest wishes that I have for the community at Regent and the community of Christians that are involved with this growing Delta network is that if a story like this comes out next year, they actually do interview some Christian theologians and Christian thinkers about this question, how should we manage the economy now? Because, as I said, I think Christians have a lot to say about this. I promised you yesterday a terrifying slide that would ruin your week, and here it is. There are a bunch I could have put up, but this is one I just learned about last week. We were having a bunch of meetings about unemployment and the dignity of work in Silicon Valley with people that are involved in the social impact arms of various frontier labs. And this was the graph that they were all very interested in debating. If you can't see it, I'll explain it to you and why you should be scared in just a second. But the graph is from a think tank called Meter, not to be confused with Meta, which is one of the big AI labs. Meter is a think tank that studies questions about social change in response to artificial intelligence. And they put together this graph that's basically on the x-axis, it's measuring time from 2020 to 2025. And on the y-axis, they're measuring the amount of hours of a human job involving software engineering or data analysis, something that doesn't involve physically manipulating the world, but involves brain power and problem solving. The number of hours that a human would take to do that task that now one of the powerful models can do instantaneously. So this is the robots are coming for your jobs graph. So in 2020, a task that a human could have completed successfully in about 4 to 6 seconds, an AI could do better than a human, just on average. 50% of the time, the AI could blow the human out of the water. But like that doesn't keep me up at night because there are very few tasks my boss requires of me that only take 6 seconds. Most of my tasks take longer than that. And the things that he pays me to do are things that are more involved. But if you walk up over time, by 2023, most of the mass market AIs that are available have the ability to do tasks that would have taken a human worker 5 or 6 minutes before to complete, as long as it's an intellectual task. And now that's starting to infringe on actual tasks that you might be paid by capitalism to do for your job. It could be counting words correctly in a passage or editing a passage or a paragraph of text. The AI could do that very well. But we weren't existentially terrified in 2023. Where we start to get really nervous is 2025, 2026, where we are on the end of this graph, where tasks that would take a wet-brained human being 10 hours to complete, like an entire workday of you taking no breaks, just chugging coffee and plugging away at that PowerPoint, at that consulting report, at that Excel spreadsheet, at that data analysis, at the thing that you owed your boss as a white-collar worker. It would take you 10 hours. It's a longer than usual workday. Claude Opus 4.6 can do instantaneously. As long as it doesn't require advanced robotics and manipulating the world, Claude can do it. And now your boss is under economic pressure to decide how he's going to get whatever those 10-hour tasks are done. He has to pay for a subscription or a license to Claude, but at the end of the day, that's going to be significantly cheaper than paying for you, who one, takes 10 hours to do that thing, and two, requires coffee and breaks and days off and an HR department. I mean, we just don't stand a chance against the robots when it comes to these tasks. So this raises some pretty profound questions that right now don't have anything to do with Christianity, but questions that have everything to do with what is work? So is your work just a series of tasks that an engineer could lay out? Could an engineer say, here's what it is to be a philosophy professor? You produce PowerPoint lecture notes on Aristotle lasting no longer than 50 minutes. You deliver PowerPoint lecture for 50 minutes. You grade X number of student exams. You list out all the tasks that fill my life, my vocation as a philosopher. You sort out any that require hands or physical manipulation of the world. And then there's AI Professor Sullivan that I guarantee you could outbid me in a labor war. And that's the real threat here. Now, you might say, my job is not just a bundle of tasks. And this is what some of the social critics are coming in to say right now. There are so many jobs that might not be the same as being a plumber or a welder. They might be intellectual, white-collar jobs, but they still can't be reduced to just a series of discrete tasks that you could describe to an AI. The AI can only compete with you in a job if you can describe to the AI what it is to successfully do that job. If you think, like, my job is more nebulous than that, like my job can't be just made concrete or quantized in those ways, then maybe you feel like you're going to be safe. But you're going to have a related problem, and this is a problem that's perhaps as old as capitalism itself. If I go to my boss, who's asking me to be more productive, given that we're living in an era with this transformative cognitive technology in it. If I go to my boss and say, guess what, my job isn't just a bunch of tasks. There's also the Meganness that kind of happens every day when I come to work, that, it can't be defined, the je ne sais quoi of me that can't be reduced to a series of tasks. Gryffindor, what's my boss going to say if I come in and say, what you pay me for is just the meanness of what I do? What's he going to say?
Take the rest of the day off.
You take the rest of the day off with pay, and we'll talk to you later. That's not, as it stands, a very compelling defense of your economic place in society. And one of the ethically very complicated features of living under capitalism is, as a worker, you do have to defend your value to the market as a whole. You've got to be able to say what exactly it is that you're contributing in a discrete way that can be traded for a wage. So huge philosophical questions being asked right now about work with really serious economic consequences. Consequences for people's jobs, consequences for people's retirement portfolios, even if you're not planning on working anymore, consequences for our tax bases. So if all of the accountants and consultants in your community suddenly find themselves out of work, who's going to pay the taxes to repair your roads and keep your schools open? These are very, very significant, very quick-moving transformations. And Christians should be a whole lot more involved in these debates. What do Christians have to contribute to this conversation? Here, I'm going to draw on my Roman Catholic tradition. I'm very curious in the Q&A and discussion afterwards how much of this carries across Christian denominations, or if you find reasons to object or see things differently. I'd love for there to be a bit of a theological debate about this. In the Catholic tradition, we have been thinking very seriously about a concept called the dignity of labor, the dignity of work, since the 1890s, since really the peak of the last big industrialization push. The last time we needed a big growth spurt in economic thinking to accompany a big growth spurt in economic productivity. There are three components traditionally to the Catholic conception of the dignity of labor in the Christian tradition, and all of them are meant to be controversial. So if you were my philosophy students, I'd say if you can't find objections to this, then you're just not thinking hard enough, because these are meant to be really substantive, surprising claims. The first component of the Catholic conception of the dignity of labor, the way I break it down, is that work is nothing more, but also nothing less than our capacity to contribute to the common good. Your work, it's not a series of discrete tasks. It's not the way that you earn money under capitalism. Christianity blew up way before capitalism occurred, so Christianity is going to have a whole lot to say about work pre-capitalism. Work is nothing more, nothing less than your capacity to contribute to the common good. And work is an essential part of the good life. So in the Christian tradition of the dignity of labor, we cannot imagine a human being flourishing if they did not have the ability to work, where work is understood as capacity to contribute to the common good. Now, immediately, again, if you're philosophers, you should start thinking of objections. You'd be like, well, my stay-at-home dad doesn't work. Does that mean that his life is not worth living? No. Because again, remember, we're going to say under this definition that work is not to be conflated with your ability to earn a wage under capitalism. When your stay-at-home dad chooses to opt out of the labor market to care for his family, he's definitely contributing to the common good. His work is that work of raising children and creating a home. You might say, I have an adult cousin who has Down syndrome. You might say, my cousin does not have the capacity to earn a wage or to raise a family. She doesn't have work in either of those two senses. Does that mean under the dignity of labor, she does not have a meaningful life? And the answer to that is also no. The way that you could contribute to the common good if you are an adult with a serious cognitive disability or deficit might simply be your ability to just show up and be with your family. It might be the various ways in which you contribute to their lives merely by your presence and enjoyment of them. It's definitely a scalable concept, and it's not meant to map onto the sense of work that we read about when we read Harvard Business Review. Like, that is way too narrow. But it is meant to capture that. And your work as a management consultant or a philosophy professor or a nurse practitioner, those are also ways that you contribute to the common good, and the church says this is a part of your human dignity. Second, some forms of work help us better express the fact that we are made in the image and likeness of God compared to other forms of work. Some forms of work are humanizing, they are fit for human beings, and other forms of work are not. An example of work that is fit for human beings. Surely work that enables you to express something that feels like a God-given gift. It could be a gift to repair things, a gift to raise children, a gift to be a teacher or a pastor or a healer. The kinds of work where you feel a sense of flow. Those are going to be examples of economic conditions that are God-honoring, that are honoring of the dignity of the human person. And we should recognize that there is such a possible thing. We all might be kind of burnt out in midlife crisis, but there is such a possible thing as finding a capacity to contribute to the common good that feels that way to people. But other forms of work are absolutely dehumanizing. We're going to talk in a second about the origin of this teaching about the dignity of work in the Catholic tradition. It comes out of the Industrial Revolution and Pope Leo XIII. But Pope Leo and figures in the 1890s who were thinking about these issues were very worried that forcing people to work in a factory and to perform the same rote task over and over and over again for 10, 14 hours a day was forcing people to behave like machines in ways that were dehumanizing, that were just abnegating the fact that they are creative, thoughtful agents every day at work, and that was a dehumanizing condition to work in. Not to say that manufacturing jobs are not capable of being dignified work, but there's a way of giving dignity to somebody who works in a manufacturing line, and that leaders, managers, could decide to do that or not. And that was kind of the origin of this debate, was trying to provoke managers to think about dignified ways of setting up factory life. In the modern day era, especially returning to our debates about artificial intelligence, one of the ways that our current frontier models have become extremely powerful is they've been fed on really well-curated data sets. Data is the food of powerful artificial intelligence. And in the early phases of training these powerful models, they needed armies of low-wage workers in Kenya, in Venezuela, human beings, to be willing to look at image after image after image and provide labels to it that could then be used in the training data to make the AI stronger at image recognition. People would be paid 14 cents an hour to look at images, sometimes images that were pornographic, sometimes images that were very violent. One of the biggest challenges for some of these large tech companies is building content filters for their artificial intelligences. And to build an accurate content filter, at least in early stages, you had to have human beings looking at the offensive or inappropriate content to flag it as inappropriate so that the AI could then be trained on that data. The dignity of labor tradition says asking a human being to spend 14 hours a day looking at pornographic images and labeling them for 14 cents an hour is a dehumanizing condition to put someone in as a condition for them having membership in the common good. Third component to the Catholic Christian teaching about the dignity of labor, and this comes a little bit later in the scene. This comes really in the 1980s with some key encyclicals, including Laborum Exercens from Pope John Paul II. This is a little bit more philosophical, but I think this is one of the things that's going to help educators quite a bit. The church makes a distinction between work that's valuable in its objective sense and work that is valuable in its subjective sense. What do we mean by this? The objective value of your work is the good outputs you put into society as a result of your labor. So the objective output of a stay-at-home dad is 3 happy, flourishing kids. The objective output of the management consultant is several $1 million in contracts that year for his firm. The objective output for the ER doctor is 1,000 cases successfully treated with no mishaps or accidents. That's the objective value of your work, is like just how much good did you produce out in the world. But the church says that is not the only value to your work, and it's not even the most important. And this is a very, very controversial claim. The church says that there's also value to your work in how it shapes and forms you as a human being. And in fact, you might be asked to take on work that is very socially productive, but would deform you in some way in the process, would dehumanize you some way in the process. And if you are forced to make that decision, the church says you should care for your own soul before you care for the output of your labor. So an example for that might be a debate that's happening in a lot of philosophy departments right now about a concept called effective altruism. There's a movement in utilitarian circles that says if you are a really intelligent, college-educated young person and you want to do the most good in the world, what you should do is try to find the highest paying career you can possibly access and do that job, and then donate a very large percentage of your income to the most effective charities you could possibly donate to. You will save lives if you become a high-frequency trader on Wall Street and earn $400,000 to $600,000 a year in your first few years in that career, and then donate 80% of that money to fighting malaria. That would be far better for the world than if you went to volunteer for the Peace Corps, digging a few wells and maybe saving 3 lives. This is a movement that comes from a very strong ethical claim, this idea that we should convert our work into the greatest possible benefit for society. But the church says no. If the type of work that you would have to take on to earn that high salary would be something that would diminish your spiritual life, would diminish your humanity in some way, you cannot sacrifice your soul for the greater good. You can't take a job that you find maybe unethical if you think high-frequency trading firms are unethical. You could fill in the blank. We could just find the unethical job to plug in that's got a high salary. I'm sure we could all think of one. The church says you can't make that trade-off. You can't trade off objective impact for the state of your soul. And likewise, it says that it's a very important function of work that we design for society, that it enable people to be correctly formed as human beings. So that's the church's teaching on the dignity of labor. It originates in the Catholic tradition in 1891. Pope Leo XIII looks around at what's happening with factories and manufacturing, and he says, the church needs to get involved in these debates. I have not given this lecture before, but I find it really fitting to do the inaugural version of it here at Regent College, a theological school that was founded 60 years ago around the premise that lay Christians should feel equipped by their theology to go out and change the broader economy, the situations in which people are asked to work in the world, that that's a very important calling for Christians to be involved in those spaces. And that is a vision about the dignity of labor that's shared with Pope Leo XIII. I told you to go to read Claude's Constitution yesterday, and I hope you guys all did that because that's fantastic. I'm not going to say go home and read all of Rerum Novarum unless you kind of are having a hard time sleeping. No offense to Pope Leo XIII. It's a very, very important encyclical, but like everything that was great and philosophical written in the 1890s, it is very long and a little bit repetitive and kind of weird. So, I'm kind of giving you the highlights. I don't know, Bruce should go read it. But the rest of you guys, it's important to get the highlights. And I just think one of the most interesting highlights about Rerum Novarum is this opening where he says, a lot of people tell you, like, Pope, stay in your lane. Like, just talk, give advice to bishops and cardinals about how they can be better at their clerical obligations. And Pope Leo XIII was doing something very novel and radical for a pope. He wrote a letter saying, I'm talking to the industrialists and the workers now. I'm not instructing cardinals about how to be good at their job, but I'm going to tell you what the gospel says about the kind of economy that we are obligated to build. And that popes did not do that before he did it. I mean, they would get in fights with like Italian leaders behind the scenes, but they wouldn't issue letters and teachings to people of all goodwill. So this was a first. There's a picture of Pope Leo XIII, possibly made by AI, but I'm sure that's what he looked like. You might ask, and I always worry about trying to actually talk about the Bible at a place like Regent, but I'll do it anyway. I'm going to have like 2 Bible passages today, and they're both about to happen, so buckle up. Get ready, David. You might ask, what is the scriptural basis for the claim that work is essential to human dignity? That's a pretty controversial claim. I've talked to many serious Christians who think that is not true. If we could imagine a society where everybody was paid a fair universal basic income, then maybe we reduced work to just family life and leisure, that would be a far superior world than the world that we currently live in. That's a claim that we can debate as Christians. Part of the scriptural basis for thinking that some kind of significant work for every single person is a part of what it takes for us to flourish is the fact that the original person had a job in the Garden of Eden. So in Genesis 2:19, Adam gets his job offer from God. Any of you guys want to take a guess of what it was? What was the original job that he didn't get paid for? What was it? Naming the animals. He was the OG zoologist. It wasn't like his job was even being husband to Eve. Like his job was to be the zoologist. So Genesis 2:19, now the Lord God had formed out of the ground all the wild animals and all the birds in the sky, and he brought them to the man to see what he would name them, and gave him the job to impose order on them. This was done by AI. I asked AI to imagine in a cartoon form what that passage would have felt like, and this is what AI came up with. I don't get why the lion has curlers. I have a lot of questions. The armadillo is super confused. But that was the original job. I know, don't overthink it. I'll make a somewhat more controversial claim about scriptural interpretation. Last night, the issue came up in the lectures about how do we go deep and explain what Christians mean by human dignity? Like, where do we get a theology of human dignity from? And I think one place that we should look for inspiration and grounding is what Scripture tells us about what we were like before the fall and what God's relationship to us was before the fall. Because clearly we were so valuable to Him that He decided to create us in the first place. And that's going to be one of the core anchors of Christian ethics. I have been having conversations recently with a friend of mine who's a rabbi who, like me, is doing a lot of research right now on the love ethic. And he shared with me a few months ago this beautiful passage from the Talmud where somebody asked this question, a Jewish scholar asked this question, why did God only create one person in the first instance, when He could have created 1,000? Like, He could have started with 1,000 Adams and then 1,000 Eves if He wanted to, but He chose to start with exactly one. And the Talmud's answer to this question is because God wanted to demonstrate in the first creation that Adam, as an individual with human dignity, made in the image and likeness of God, had everything inside of him. Like, Adam was enough, anything would have been enough for God, but Adam was also enough for God. Like, Adam contained human dignity in himself, in his personhood. And so did Eve, and so does each of us. In the beginning, dignity is inherent in our condition with God. And in the beginning, there was something resembling work. There was a thing that Adam needed to do to help contribute to the garden. So that's one scriptural source for getting this idea that work is essential to our flourishing and our nature. Another source came up, I think, very beautifully in the chapel session that was led this morning and where David preached, where we had the opportunity, if you guys were there, to read through Psalm 90, which ends with this very powerful exhortation to God to establish the work of our hands for us. God, give us a job. Give me something to do. And it might be spiritual work, but it's work. It's a way that we are called to contribute to the common good. And the Christian tradition says that is very important. And it's not just important because of its external productivity, but it's even more important because of how it forms us and what it does for us. So now we get to the era of AI, and we think, oh my gosh, we have this very powerful technology, which in some quarters is promised to take the tedium of our work away from us. Like, that is, if you listen to the really rah-rah tech cheerleaders on the various AI podcasts right now, I also listen to all of those. I fly a lot. If you listen to those podcasts, the great promise is, and you listen to the commercials about AI, it's even more vivid. The great promise is, think about all the tedium and awful things that come into your work right now. Very soon, all of that will be taken from you. The AI can now do 10-hour tasks on your behalf. And there is a segment of the population that thinks this is an unadulterated good. As Christians, we're called, I believe, to be critical of that claim in two ways. First, because we believe that absolutely everyone has human dignity and it has nothing to do with how productive you are. You are called to be productive, but your value never depended on your productivity. We believe that isolating certain segments of the population, removing their access from work, removing their ability to participate in the common good in the ways that work provides people a channel for participating in the common good, that is not good for society. That is a morally questionable direction for our economy to go in. And second, we believe that as we increasingly turn to AI to take on some of the tedious aspects of our labor, we have to always be cognizant about how, as our work is changing, it's affecting the subjective value of what we do. Are we still having access to the kinds of experiences and calls that we need to form our souls? Or is that something that we've lost in this life of promised leisure that comes from AI? I think these similar concerns carry over very directly into conversations that we're having about the effect of artificial intelligence on schools and universities. And this obviously hits a whole lot closer to home for me. So I want to now turn to this topic and see what we can take from the teaching about the dignity of labor and pour it over into some of our thinking about how we want to design educational institutions going forward. One of the coolest things about AI that makes it very different from industrialization in the 1890s is industrialization was a way of making manual labor much more efficient. AI is making cognitive labor much more efficient. The great promise of AI is it thinks better and faster and more productively than we do. I found this picture in someone's newsletter 2 weeks ago, and I think it's absolutely hilarious. But this is a picture of a French school where you have this dream. The professor is so sick of teaching these snotty French students that instead he's organized this technology where all he has to do is feed the books into the grinder, and it just implants, zaps the knowledge into their heads. And so he's able to train and form them in that way. And you could tell he's just doing it with relish. And one of these poor kids has to turn the handle to keep the machine going. Plato is one of my favorite philosophers. Plato's Symposium is one of the great dialogues about the role of love in teaching. I definitely recommend that for you for your bedtime reading tonight. It's a little R-rated, so I don't take it with a grain of salt. But in the Symposium, Plato imagines Socrates at a party, and everybody at the party is very drunk, and they start the conversation by talking about one of Socrates' students, Alcibiades, who's really gone badly, like in life. Like he's just turned out to be an awful person. He's meant to be a military general, but he keeps losing battles, and then he lies about it, and just everybody's sick of Alcibiades, and they're blaming Socrates because Socrates was his tutor and his teacher. And Socrates eventually, he's drunk and he's frustrated, and he throws up his hands and he's like, look, teaching someone is not a matter of taking what's in here and popping open their brain and pouring it in. Like it's not like pouring wine from one skull cup into another. Like he has his own freedom. He had his own ability to respond to the education that I was giving him, and he chose to be deformed by it. And like, it's not my problem. One of the original ideas in Greek virtue ethics is that education is not just grinding books into a machine and zapping them into another human being's head. That not only is that impossible, but that would be completely defeating the purpose of what we want from human formation and education. What we want is formation and care for someone's soul. How does this relate to the discussion of the dignity of labor? Well, here's where I think we can take those three distinctions and we can just port them over into our ideas about what human dignity in an educational setting would look like, even in the era of powerful AI. So claim one, learning is nothing more and nothing less than our capacity to contemplate the truth. And this capacity for contemplation, this capacity for thought, this is essential to the good life. Contemplation, famously for the ancient Greek philosophers, was a very, very special element of human nature. Aristotle says one of the most interesting things about contemplation is it has no end, and you can't do it faster or slower. It has no speed and it has no end. Aristotle thought heaven was basically permanent contemplation. This is where St. Thomas Aquinas gets his vision of heaven, by basically taking this Greek idea and then bringing it into Christianity. You can't do contemplation faster or slower. Let's suppose that Jens is on a meditation retreat after all of the horrors of hosting me this week. And he wants to take some time to just contemplate the scriptures and contemplate the truth and realize it's a hard discipline, but he sets aside some time to do it. And then he leaves his contemplation retreat, and I text him, and I'm like, how much contemplation did you get done? How fast did you do it? What's your contemplation rate? What's your productivity? Did you feel like you contemplated 100 words per minute on your retreat? The Greeks, Aristotle, and Jens, I hope, would say that is incoherent. That's just not the way producing sentences works that way, but contemplating them, it has no speed, it has no beginning, it has no end. Learning is nothing more, nothing less than our capacity to contemplate the truth, and it can't be constrained by productivity metrics the same way that task completion that artificial intelligence can be measured. And it's essential to the good life. There was absolutely contemplation in the Garden of Eden, contemplation about what that armadillo's name should be. but also contemplation of God himself. There were failures to contemplate, failures to understand that had grave, grave, grave consequences for the human story. But it's part of the original good creation and clearly a very good part of our lives. Second claim, some forms of learning are humanizing, and some forms of learning are absolutely dehumanizing. They are the learning equivalent of paying people 14 cents an hour to look at pornographic pictures for 14 hours a day. What would be examples of this? I find my students find it a lot easier to come up with dehumanizing examples than humanizing examples of learning, but we can think on the dehumanizing a little bit more straightforwardly. I think a lot of us realized during the pandemic that many of the school setups that we arranged for elementary schoolers were dehumanizing in certain ways. They just didn't match the nature of an emerging child's personality. Asking them to sit in front of a Zoom screen for 10 hours a day while, math facts were read to them is not something that is a humanizing activity for a 10-year-old. In our current college classrooms, Notre Dame, like so many other universities, is totally hooked on learning management systems. And many of us faculty members unwittingly just program electronic quizzes into Canvas so that every day of the week, without rhyme or reason, and we never update our syllabi, a student might be getting an electronically delivered quiz asking them to reproduce 5 homework facts to sort of tick the box that they've done their homework. We might think that method of teaching philosophy, the kind of mindless, undesigned quiz by LMS system, is a dehumanizing way to teach people a certain subject matter when you have a more human way of engaging them with that subject matter. I think the same kind of distinctions that we saw in the age of industrialization come up against the ideas about industrialized education. And finally, and this I feel perhaps most passionately about, and this is where you likely, college professors I think have are kind of a union on this topic right now, but we're oftentimes fighting political forces that have us outnumbered. Your value in learning can be measured in an objective sense. We can measure it on how well you do on standardized tests, how well you do in securing labor after college. We can measure it in productivity, like whether or not you can write a 10-page essay in a Blue Book exam in 2 hours. Like there are ways of putting productivity metrics on learning, and some of that is important. The same way objective products in labor can be important, but they're not as important as the subjective value of learning, as the way that the conditions under which you learn shape and develop your soul. So how do we bring this into a bit more philosophical focus? One of my favorite philosophers, who's also very, very hard to understand, but favorite 20th century philosophers is Simone Weil. Simone Weil was a bit of a mystic, virtue ethicist, kind of an existentialist, writing around the time of World War II. Her brother's very famous. André Weil was a very famous mathematician. They were a family of nerds. And she was Roman Catholic, and she wrote an essay. I hope I put the title on here. Of course I did not. She wrote an essay with the title, on the importance of attention in school studies with respect to the love of God. I think I translated it roughly correctly. But she wrote a long essay about how important it is to do hard homework assignments in order for you to love God. That was really the crux of the essay. And Weil's argument in the 1940s was that it's important for you as a young person to have to suffer through a really hard math assignment from your Calc 1 teacher, not because you will ever use calculus in your job someday, because, I don't know, spoiler alert, you will not. I've used calculus 0 days since I graduated high school. I have needed it 0. But because in learning how to pay attention to something abstract like that, and to care about it and to focus on it, you develop the faculty of attention that you are going to need to attend to God. So she says, the development of the faculty of attention forms the real object, and it is almost the sole interest of studies. It is the subjective value of learning, is that for her, you develop this virtue of attention. And every effort adds a little gold to a treasure that no power on earth could ever take away. We don't obtain the most precious gifts by going in search of them, but instead by waiting for them. Man can't discover them by his own powers, and if he sets out to seek for them, he will find in their place counterfeits of which he will be unable to discern the falsity. So this is written in 1942. She didn't even know about the atomic bomb, if you remember yesterday. I mean, she was really like, there were some huge revolutions in society coming Vay's way that she had not predicted. But she did say something that is very prophetic for our current moment, where we have devices that have already completely colonized our attention. And we've developed a culture around these devices where we constantly freely give our attention in return for cat videos and for quick productivity and whatever our task is. And what Vay says is when you give away your attention so cheaply, not only are you giving away something that is extraordinarily precious, it's like your ability to contemplate truth, your ability to enjoy like one of the key elements of a good life. Not only are you giving that away, but you're giving it away in such a way that you might not even know that you've given it away so freely. Like you might not even know what you have lost. And that's why schools are so important to her, is because that math teacher that you despised in high school, I'm thinking of her name right now. She was awful. But she forced you to practice, to be habituated in these ways, to have that skill so that later on you were able to make some negative space in your mind and your heart for the more profound truths of this life to enter. Attention is deeply connected to love, and I think one of the ways that we realize this most viscerally is think about the time that a child or a sibling was born and first came home from the hospital. I think about I was 15 years old when my youngest brother was born and my parents brought him home, and me and my middle brother, we could not go 3 minutes without biting each other's heads off at that point in our lives. But my parents came home with this one-day-old human being, and they set him on the bed, and I just remember for 15 minutes we were just completely absorbed in staring at him. Like there's something about a brand new human being, one that is not yet productive, by the way, or has found its way of contributing to the common good, but something about the mere image and likeness of God that we see in another human being that's absolutely absorbing of our attention. And that's really the essence of love, is that you want to give your attention to something. But if you don't have that capacity because you've never been forced to do it, then you are missing out on the preconditions for one of the essential virtues of living a good human life. And that's something that we should not give away so cheaply. How am I doing on time, David?
Another 10 or so.
Perfect. All right, 10 minutes. So let's then talk about how we can fix schools. Hopefully we can debate some of these points. So look, we have all already, thankfully, survived some big technological revolutions. And I think it's important. It's one thing to talk about AI in the very abstract terms, but I think it is really incumbent upon us right now to think very concretely about what we're witnessing and how we're describing it. All of us have survived some big technological shifts. I was in my first year of college when Google hit the mass market. Before Google, for those of you guys that are under the age of 43, before Google, the way people figured out facts that they were curious about was they went to encyclopedias or card catalogs at the library, like physical things held knowledge. When I was 10 years old, my grandparents realized that I had a lot of intellectual curiosity, and so they bought my family the entire 37-volume set of Encyclopedia Britannica. And I remember being like so proud and confused by Encyclopedia Britannica as a small child. If I wanted to know the answer to a question like what do killer whales eat, or where, I was obsessed with Prince William at the time. It was my age. Like, where does Prince William go to school? What is his school like? How do you get to be a prince? You had to go find the volume. Normally, it wouldn't even be under the file that you were looking for. So if you only knew killer whales by the name killer whales, you didn't know that they were called orcas, you would spend hours trying to find the right entry in Encyclopedia Britannica. First, you had to know that it was orca. And then you could access the facts. The downsides of Britannica, difficult to use, very static. This is going to blow your young people's minds. You would get the option of buying an additional book each year that were just all of the facts that had been added to human knowledge in the past year, contained in a single book that then you put on the next end of the shelf. So whenever you bought the Britannicas, it was all of human knowledge as of 1992, just locked in, loaded, and then you could buy new books to update human knowledge, but it was not dynamic. It certainly wasn't willing to work with you as an inquirer. It was there, static, waiting for you to ask after it, and it was way above a 10-year-old's reading level. The upshot was that it was very authoritative. To write an entry in Britannica, you really had to know something about orcas, and at least convinced a bunch of editors that you were an authoritative source. So you knew that you were getting something that was pretty darn close to the truth. Google came out my first year of college. I didn't touch those Britannicas ever again. I was in my friend Jessica's dorm room. She was a student at MIT. I'd gone to visit her. And I remember we were going to look up Chinese restaurants to eat dinner at, and I opened up Yahoo and started typing in Chinese restaurants, and she's like, oh no. She looked at me with disgust. She's like, we don't use that. We don't use that one anymore. We use Google. That's what the pros use. And of course, I immediately downloaded Google to my desktop and started using that as my preferred search engine. And you didn't have to take any college classes on how to use Google. Like, Google made it effortless for that to be suddenly the way that you inquire about the world. And we all survived that. In the era of Google, we made a trade-off. It was incredibly easy to use, but the people writing the blue-lined options that the Google search gave you could be anyone, from a marine biologist to just a kook on the internet who's a killer whale enthusiast. And one of the biggest problems for universities 20 years ago was trying to train a generation of inquirers to know the difference, that just because Google feeds you something doesn't mean that it's necessarily authoritative, but it's very easy to access. Now we're living through another shift. We've survived the first one, but this is the shift to AI. And if I was a betting woman, I would say that in a few years, we're not going to get 10 blue links anymore when we're inquiring after a research question. We're going to have our preferred LLM, and we will ask it a question, and it will give us one answer. And it will be so much easier to use than Google because it will be trained on all of the previous questions you've been asking that AI. It will know about you. It'll know about why you like killer whales and how often you inquire about what they eat. It's going to be perfectly tailored to the search that you're performing. Is it going to be authoritative? The verdict is still out. This is what we're debating. Is this better or worse than search right now? On the one hand, there is no single human trying to perpetrate a fraud on you at the end of the AI search. On the flip side, we really have no definitive idea where it got that answer from. It got it from a bunch of stolen books and something that happened in a really deep neural network that even the engineers who designed it can't quite explain. Does that constitute authority? Who knows? We definitely have this powerful research tool, and we're going to have to start adjusting our educational systems and our concept of what it is to be contemplative, to be an inquirer, to wrestle with the fact that this is going to become the dominant way in which we inquire. This creates two existential problems for universities and for schools as well, and I just want to name these, and then I want to open the discussion about how we could potentially solve them. One existential problem that I think is coming for us now that AI has become our dominant mode of inquiry is a problem of atomization. So in previous iterations, you had the opportunity to access Britannica or Google, but there was always kind of one static source that you would go to. And there was no personalization. It's not the case that Google was creating a special Megan Sullivan webpage every time I inquired. But now we have the capacity as a society to offer hyper-personalized learning, a sequence of learning that is personally tailored to the interests and questions of the inquirer. And on the one hand, that's going to be a remarkable power that we've never had in our schools before. But on the flip side, it's going to mean that certainly long before students arrive at college, they have been exposed to ways of learning that require them as an individual to just engage with an artificial intelligence and to not engage or depend on other human minds. And that is a trade-off. The social dimension of learning is something that was at risk during COVID and now is at grave risk. The second question I've already mentioned is the issue of authority. There are senses in which artificial intelligence is extremely powerful at predicting the relevance of an answer that it offers to an inquirer. But again, going back to the era of Socrates, there is a profound difference between relevance and truth. And whether or not AI has the capacity to contemplate in the way that a human mind could, and how important that kind of contemplation is to our systems of education, that is very much an open question. It's a closed question for me. I don't think that AI can contemplate the truth. But it's at the very least an open question about whether or not we even care about those values anymore, or we just care about producing a generation of inquirers who are super productive. They're able to get relevant answers very quickly. And in that case, AI is going to blow them out of the water, the same way it's going to blow many of our workers out of the water. I want to talk very briefly, I want to brag about Notre Dame for 2 seconds. I think there are a few things that universities, places like seminaries like Regent College, and that some of our better schools do that we should not give up lightly to our AI overlords. And this is where I'm going to start to wrap up. When we think about the social dimension of education, it's something far more profound than people just making friends in school. This is the subjective value of learning. It's how you learn to be a human person as a result of your learning. And some kinds of schools and universities do this really well. I would say that Christian seminaries, colleges, and universities that have held close to their mission do this work really well. An example that came up recently on our own campus that was very beautiful and is an example of something that AI could never teach someone how to do. We've had the worst winter ever in the Midwest. We've had just terrible amounts of snow. And in January, a few men in a dorm on our campus decided first they were going to build an igloo, and then they got a little bit more ambitious and decided they were going to build a chapel out of snow and ice. And spent a week, they skipped class, which was probably a terrible idea, skipped class, and the temperature kept getting colder and colder, and they built stained glass and candles and an altar and a steeple out of snow and ice. And then they were so proud of their work that they went to one of the priests that serves as a chaplain in their dorm, and they asked the priest if he would say Mass in their snow chapel. And the priest said, "No, you fools, it's 9 degrees outside. Like, we have perfectly good heated chapels that I beg you guys to come to Mass at," and you just say no. But they finally prevailed, and these students put up a whiteboard sign on a Monday, about a week after they had started construction on the snow chapel, and they said, "Hey, we're going to hold Mass here with Father Pete, with one of the chaplains, at 10 p.m. tonight, when it is 0 degrees outside." Fahrenheit, Canadians, Fahrenheit, which is like negative 1,000 in your world. And 2,000 young people showed up at 10 o'clock at night to attend the Mass at the Ice Chapel. This is not the kind of experience that could be facilitated through an AI-based education. Like this idea of having this idea, creating something with others, inviting a priest into your worship service. Those are all valuable steps in becoming a person and learning how to contemplate the truth and realizing that you have this capacity within you. But it's something that requires the spontaneity and messiness and liturgical life that just comes from breathing on other human beings, something that AI will never be able to offer in a learning environment. Universities can also deform people, as anybody who's seen the film Animal House realizes. It's not the case that all sociality is good all the time in education. There are actually forms of social structures that could happen in our schools and our universities that are horrible. But the key thing that we just can't lose sight of is that is how human beings are formed, is with others. And we cannot design an education system that is just focused on the cognitive productivity enhancements of artificial intelligence. On the authority point, universities have long been caretakers of the truth. There's a reason why you cannot be a professor until you've received a PhD, and you can't receive a PhD until you have authoritatively discovered some new little bit of knowledge that can be added to the world. That's how you enter this profession. This is what this guild has always done. I think one of the areas where we also need to put our foot down is AI might be extremely productive and efficient at gathering and processing data, but it does not have the capacity to be a caretaker for the truth, to have capital A authority in the way that the human community can. And humans can abuse that. Obviously, I picked up on my alma mater, Oxford. In some cases, schools and universities have said that we are the arbiters of the truth, and they have been very, very wrong about what the truth is. And that has been really bad for the surrounding society. It's important, if we take this role as being the arbiters and caretakers of the truth in our human institutions seriously, that we also are very virtuous and morally reflective in what that responsibility means, and not just to assume that humans are always going to be better than AIs at actually exercising this virtue of caring about the truth. What are some things that we can do to combat these problems? I'm just going to list these off really quickly, and then you can see all the slides that I didn't cover because I'm scared of David, and I want to make sure I finish in time. What can we do? I think things that we can do, I address this to folks at universities like Regent College or Notre Dame, but I think this very much carries over into secondary schools. I think there are 3 things where we can really start to double down, and I don't want to leave you guys without this message. One, I think that we need to offer space for contemplation right now in a hyper-productive world, space where people can ask these bigger questions. I think that, again, if you read that Claude Constitution, they are very much hoping that AI is going to become your trusted mentor and your friend and is going to play this role of spiritual direction and formation in your life going forward. We should resist this dramatically. There are things that only humans can give to other humans in the context of an educational environment. And universities need to really stand up for the fact that we have offered those experiences and will continue to do so, hopefully for another millennium. 2, I think places like Regent and Notre Dame are very well equipped for this. We can't just bash AI constantly. We've got to stop actually talking about AI so much and spend a whole lot more time giving people a vision for what a good human life is going to look like going forward. The Delta mnemonic, the Delta framework, that's our attempt to try to boil this down so we at least have some common themes that we can constantly be hitting over and over again with our students at Notre Dame about what this looks like. It might look different at Regent, it might look different in different kinds of local circumstances, but we've got to stop being in fear mode and start being in faith mode, I think, if we are going to execute our responsibilities as educational institutions well in the years to come. And then finally, and this is related to the second point, and this is especially incumbent on Christian institutions, we've got to offer people hope, especially if some of these dire predictions do come to pass. If there is massive unemployment, if there's a recession, if the economic model and the structural models that have powered education up to this point start to sputter, they start to fail, and we've got to rethink the structure and operations of our institutions. If we have to go through these hard shocks as humans with dignity, as Christian humans with dignity, we should be a place in society where people look to find faith in something much deeper in a period of great uncertainty. And figuring out what that means to have that confidence, to do it not in a Pollyannish way, but to do it in a serious way, to do it in a theologically grounded way, that's going to be our big challenge. But in an era where everybody and their brother is telling you to constantly think about artificial intelligence, you can say that that one speaker from Notre Dame came and begged you to think about human virtue even more right now, because that is really what our institutions are going to have to offer. And that is something extremely valuable. So I want to thank you guys for all the time. I think we now have a chance to hear from Professor Zimmerman, but thank you so much. There are some of my students. We're going to have discussion. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for that inspiring vision of work and learning and the move from fear mode to faith mode. Amen. We'll now have our formal response from Dr. Jens Zimmerman, whom I will introduce in a moment. But after the response, I want to prompt you that we will have our live Q&A. So if you're joining us online, I would encourage you to submit your questions. They can go to our email address at langlectures@regent-college.edu. So that's langlectures@regent-college.edu, and we can feature your question in the discussion, and I'll give instructions to those of you that are here live about where you can line up in a moment. Now to our respondent. Dr. Jens Zimmerman is J.I. Packer Professor of Theology here at Regent College. He's also director of the Houston Center for Humanity and the Common Good. His main interests are philosophical anthropology, who we are, and epistemology, how we know, which means a lot of time on meditation retreats. Also highly productive, in addition to many scholarly articles, Dr. Zimmerman has authored and edited numerous books, including Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Christian Humanism, and especially for our purposes tonight, he was editor of Human Flourishing in a Technological World, a Christian Vision, and Re-envisioning Christian Humanism, Education, and the Restoration of Humanity, all published with Oxford University Press. So please welcome Dr. Zimmerman.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Megan. Whatever I can do, I think I can speak for everyone here that you are simply irreplaceable. And I also cannot do what Megan does, which is simply speak to you. Like, I'm this German academic. I'm going to have to use a script, which is purely human originated, I can tell you. So the one sentence that Megan didn't get to say, which triggered my whole response, was this: the singularity has come for universities, and we will certainly have to adapt as a result. If you think the point of university humanities classes was to teach expository essay writing, the years ahead will be a catastrophe. The days of a writer struggling to clarify a sentence or synthesize a complex idea or to think of a relevant example are over. So I want to basically just use a very short time to fill in some of the things that Megan didn't say, and there will be just a little bit of AI bashing, but not out of fear, but for sake of clarity. So thank you so much again for coming to speak to us on this important topic, and also I must say for spearheading this fantastic Delta initiative of a well-informed, comprehensive Christian response to this new technology. I think we all agree that it's deeply needed. And I want to wholeheartedly affirm your basic thesis of tonight's lecture. And I'm quoting you here again, just leaving out a short something. Generative AI is not going away, but if we want a humane future, we will have to form humane persons, people who can live in community, search for truth, and resist the pull toward optimized desolation. Beautiful line. And I'm going to pull that all around essay writing. What I heard you saying in tonight's lecture is that our resistance to the negative aspect of AI depends on two things. The first is that we need to be clear on understanding what AI actually is. And the second, we also need to have a clear understanding who we actually are. Again, I could not agree more. I did wonder, however, whether it would not be more helpful to answer both questions with clear, unambiguous reference to the category of the person, as developed in Christian personalist theology. Why not engage AI by insisting uncompromisingly on the distinction that human beings are persons and AI is not? The human person is what your Delta acronym describes, I think, right? A unique someone made in God's image, as most fully revealed in God's own incarnation. As Craig reminded us last night, by becoming human in Christ, God revealed to us that we are persons and not machines, and the machines are not persons. What are persons? Persons are a spirit-body unity who have a twofold dignity. And I found that really helpful from Gilbert Mailander, this distinction of human dignity in terms of what he calls personal dignity, that makes every human being equally sacred regardless of any physical or mental capacity, which is important for the handicapped, for disabled, and so on. And then persons also, he says, have a human dignity that pertains to natural capabilities. For instance, we're endowed with freedom from mere instinctual life, and therefore have moral responsibility. We're embodied spirits who are formed into mature persons through the struggle of truth-seeking by means of encountering the world through others. And Megan also appealed to that. And this personal formation through the struggle of truth-seeking is exemplified, I would say, in essay writing. I'll come back to that in a minute. So all of these personal qualities, I think we can agree, are contained in your Delta acronym. Now, if this is what persons are, then we should be equally clear why AI cannot be a person. And I was happy to hear you say yesterday that you do not believe that AI will ever be able to attain to sentience or consciousness, which is great. As many computer experts, like Jaron Lanier, for instance, have pointed out, AI is simply code. The label artificial intelligence is a category mistake, a misnomer for complex information processing. If you use that all the time, it wouldn't be so appealing, right? It's just complex information processing. The very name AI is a combination of gross philosophical reduction and marketing ambition. You may recall that Alan Turing's false reduction of intelligence to mathematical problem solving helped then create the illusion that the tech industry might produce artificial silicon brains, an illusion which the tech industry cleverly used to raise billions in funding, especially from governments' military budgets. Indeed, the whole idea that there can be silicon brains with human-type intelligence rests on a false computational theory of mind that has been abandoned by leading neuroscientists like Antonio Damasio and many like him. For the reductive computational theory of mind, all of life boils down to information processing, and the brain is then the central computer of the body whose workings are reducible to biology. This false view has been thoroughly discredited within neuroscience by the theory of embodied knowing, or enactment theory. The main point of this theory is that mind is not reducible to disembodied consciousness, but requires a holistic, embodied existence, so that life of mind and life of body shape each other interdependently. And this means that without a biological body that maintains itself through metabolistic exchange with the material world, there is no mind, there's no intelligence, and there's no thought. I repeat, no living body, no intelligence, no thinking. AI does not and never will possess general intelligence, spirit, freedom, or genuine creativity arising from embodied being, not to mention love. Unsurprisingly, little of this scientific research makes a dent in the reductive worldview of Silicon Valley. Cerebrocentrism and the computational theory of mind continue to dominate the rather undernourished anthropological imagination of the tech industry. So let's assume that we agree on this clear distinction that humans are persons, but AI is not. So I was a little puzzled then why you would still talk about silicon brains in contrast to wet brains. If we're fairly clear on what persons are, then should we not drop a brain-centered view of human perception? Similarly, how can LLM software pass the test of doing philosophy? It's another phrase you used somewhere. If philosophy is not and never was, and yourself were just affirming this, it never was about abstract reasoning. Given that there is no mind operative in AI, how can the large language models be said to do philosophy? They're pattern recognition programs that assemble text based on statistics probability. LLMs are text extruding machines. They are, as one critic aptly named them, stochastic parrots that generate texts by statistically mimicking patterns from their training data without any understanding. Does philosophizing really consist in assembling phrases or shuffling symbols based on probability? I think not. Maybe if you're an old school analytic philosopher, but not for real philosophy. As philosophers, should we not resist the purely instrumental model of language that props up the very illusion that language models are responding to philosophical questions? This reductive instrumental view of language regards words as arbitrarily chosen labels which we assign to a world consisting of an assembly of objects on which we then confer meaning. But that's not what the Christian tradition has thought of language. In reality, as Christian thinkers have insisted, at least since Augustine, language is the very lifeblood of thought and the matrix by which we experience a meaningful world, because we're made in the image of the Word. We are, as the Church Fathers like to put it, logikoi, those who are logos-shaped in the image of Christ, and therefore our creativity, our linguisticality, our affectivity, our communality, and our relationality, they're all interconnected, because our embodied spirit being participates in the logos. in Christ, the eternal Word. That is also, by the way, why doing philosophy, that is the pursuit of wisdom, is not simply abstract thinking, but it's a way of life. And Plato and Aristotle certainly thought of philosophy as a virtuous way of life, as Megan pointed out, and not merely abstract thought, which is why the Christians pounced on it, right? I mean, the Christians adopted and transformed Greek philosophy, claiming that assimilation to God, sure, that's what it is, but through Christ, Christianity was now the only true philosophy, the only true way of life. So, coming then to the end here, to the essays, can these programs write essays? No, because no person, no one, is writing anything there. LMS can simulate what we call an essay by drawing on a vast set of digitized human works on similar topics, detecting patterns, and reassembling them for the given parameters. Leaving aside the fact that sometimes they produce subgrade papers, my main point here is that the automation of essay writing means we are no longer writing them. So who cares if an LLM can write an essay? It means that the spiritual formation that an essay writing means, but we're not doing. There is what the computer does is not what we do, because the machine brings to the act of production no consciousness, no motivation, no supportive metabolism, no memory, or any larger purpose. So again, who cares if the machine can produce an essay? If we're not writing them, we're diminishing both the product and certainly diminishing ourselves. And this then takes me to your excellent insistence on the last bit on formation in the humanities. I could not agree more. Formation all the way. I'm only puzzled that, at least in the notes that I had, you seem to oppose formation to expository essay writing, right? That's the sentence I quoted. So Christian humanists, though, have rightly insisted that character formation happens precisely through reading and writing. Writing an essay requires just the formative virtues that you pointed out to us. Writing an essay requires hospitality, the opening of one's mind to strangers, welcoming ideas and thoughts that are not my own. It requires the courage to be challenged and the humility of recognizing that I might be wrong and I'm in need of being taught. And maybe because there's such a burden, there's such a challenge, people are just more relieved to click the button and have it written for them. So writing an essay thus requires the same virtues required for honest, open dialogue, which is, by the way, the only way we can acquire truth either in the humanities or the natural sciences. So from a Christian perspective, my seeking truth through dialogue, by going out of myself toward the other and drawing the other within myself, reflects, I think there was a good Catholic, Ratzinger, who said this, reflects the very movement of the Spirit of God within the Trinity. For all his problems, the philosopher Hegel rightly characterized the movement of the human spirit in education just in this way. The spirit moves out toward what is alien, welcomes it into itself, and by integrating it into oneself, one changes, broadens one's horizons, broadens one's spirit, enlarges one's soul, and acquires insight. That's what happens ideally when we force you to write essays. I mean, is not that the very essence of humanistic education? And handing over this work to a soulless, mindless algorithm is not resistance, but capitulation for all the wrong reasons. So, while I'm fully on board with your excellent initiative and your call for resistance, I also think we just need to be really clear on what AI is and who we truly are so that we're not taken in by the reductionistic assumptions about human identity that prop up much of the current hype about this technology. So like you ended, I'm all for, beefing up our understanding of what it means to be human. I mean, after all, we've invented this stuff, right? It's part of our sort of automizing brain that's put this automation functioning mechanism out there. To quote Steve Talbot, one of my favorite tech critics, and I'll end with this, he says, however nearly miraculous the technology we have today, the human spirit from which it stems is surely the real miracle. And how can this spirit be outshone by the brilliance of its own creation? It only can be outshone if we forget who we actually are. And if we want to integrate computational technology into our lives without destroying ourselves, we first need to recover and to reclaim ourselves. And so I'm grateful to your passionate call for arms in this regard. Just let me know where I can sign up.
Thank you so much for that rich and engaging response. I'll let Dr. Sullivan comment in a moment, but first I want to invite those of you that have questions in our live audience. You can make your way to the back of the room. There's a microphone there and a microphone in that corner, and I'll call on you for questions. We'll take about 15 minutes for Q&A. I figure if the Notre Dame students can do Mass at 10 p.m. in the ice and snow, we can extend our time by about 10 minutes tonight, so we'll go a little longer than advertised, but it'll be well worth it, so do stay for that. Dr. Sullivan.
Yeah, I just want to thank Jens for a very, very generous commentary. And to give you guys a little context, 2 weeks ago, Jens asked me what I was going to speak about tonight, and I sent him like 20 single-space pages of ideas. So, he was really buckled up with not knowing what was going to come out of my mouth when I showed up. But I did say all of those things that he repeated. Let's just talk about essay writing for a second, because I'm so grateful that you picked up on that topic. It's your comment is an example of something I think we need to be doing 24/7 at universities right now, namely identifying and arguing for which of our practices are humanizing and why. So Jens gives us this very beautiful argument and defense of writing as a capacity that unleashes someone's human dignity. And I think that is the way that we defeat the robots, is exactly through thinking and arguments like that, and making that case, and not just not letting Silicon Valley set the terms of these debates for us, but instead having the confidence, if we might not know everything that AI is capable of doing, but for those of us that have worked around these educational institutions that have existed for over 1,000 years, we have confidence in what it takes to form a human being. And we can say confidently, or argue, because about what's going to come next, argue whether expository essays are the way to realize that. In the case of philosophy, I think I am going through another one of my crises, because I grew up and trained in a branch of philosophy where I was told from my first year of undergraduate onward that the primary function of a good philosopher is the analysis of arguments. So somebody gives you some text and you detect the argument, and then you determine possible objections and the logical structure of the argument, and you diagnose it and you propose remedies, and that is how philosophical progress is made. And if that's what we believe about the vocation of a philosopher, we're toast. Because AI is just extremely good at that. It is way better than any of my doctoral students currently are at some difficult texts. And it's about approaching my capabilities. And if that graph is to be believed, it's a matter of months before it can do a logical analysis more efficiently and accurately than I can. Now, what Jens says is something that I deeply believe, that it was a mistake to ever believe that that was what the vocation of a philosopher was. We mistakenly thought that. But what the real vocation of a philosopher is the care for the soul. That's what Socrates thought he was doing. Socrates didn't write any expository essays. He didn't write anything. He literally just went around having dialogues where he tried to teach the youth of Athens how to care for their souls, and really believed that that was the original vocation. And I take Jens's point about certain forms of writing, and certainly Simone Weil would agree with you and hate what I'd written in that article. But Simone Weil would say, yes, there's something very important about, something very human about reading and writing that cultivates our attention and helps us to care for our souls and gives us great gifts that we need in order to enjoy the fullness of our human dignity. And that's where I'm like, yeah, that sounds really beautiful when you say it. And then when I actually think about the writing prompts that I give my students, I do wonder, I'm enough of a philosopher to wonder whether or not there are other habits that maybe we should use to help people care for their souls in this era, and whether is it still a 5-page philosophical exposition of Descartes, or should we enter a more experimental phase? I'm not recommending this. I'm just saying like what I worry about. We sponsor new classes to be developed in our institute each year, And we sponsored a really radical first theology course 2 years ago, where instead of, they have the students write one big essay about the nature of liturgy, but the main assignment for the class is they take 50 students who have never sung in a choir before, and they make them learn how to perform live music. And their final exam is to create a sung liturgy and then perform a public performance of that liturgy. And I think, man, in the era of powerful artificial intelligence, maybe what it means to be a theologian for a group of like hyper-saturated AI-addicted 18-year-olds is to force them to sing for 3 hours a week in with a grade based on how strong they are. Maybe we need to think outside of the box. If we ground ourselves in care for the soul is what our primary purpose is, then maybe the era of AI is going to give us some opportunities to be a bit more creative or wide-ranging in how we do it. At the very least, maybe not Regent students are like this, but I've got to be honest about my Notre Dame students. 10% of them are going to write that essay and have that spiritual experience, soul-carrying experience, and then 90% of them are not going to do it because of this just extremely attractive, as Simone Weil says, like fool's gold that's available to them. Is it incumbent on me as their professor? Is there anything I can do as their professor to try to get that percentage up of like how I teach gets more of the real thing in their hands and less of the fake thing? And you can't determine the virtue of your students. Again, Socrates knew that with Alcibiades. But maybe through the practices that we introduce in our vocation as teachers in this era, we can find more creative solutions to that. Yeah, I know. Regent students always do the reading. Notre Dame students, I'm not going to lie, they're not doing the reading.
Great. Let's go to audience questions now. And just a friendly reminder, because we have lots of people at the mics, to keep your question concise. Let's start on this side of the room here. Go ahead.
Greetings. I'm Roderick Lewis. Thank you very much for a very entertaining and informative seminar. A couple of housekeeping questions that I would hope you can answer after you answer my main question. The MC, the gentleman in the suit, I've been identified, or you've been identified by Megan as David, but I would very much appreciate being told your name and your position here before I leave. And also the slides that Megan has gone through, are they going to be accessible at some point after this is over? The main question relates to ethics and the common good. Are there boundaries that you believe exist between what the group of people that are, in quotes, affected by the common good concept? Are there boundaries? Is it just the developed world, the wealthy West, and developed parts of Asia? Or are we also, should we as Christians also be thinking about the non-developed, not as fortunate world, such as half of Africa, more than that probably, that don't have toilets, that need clean air, and the same with India, in Yemen, in the Arabian Peninsula. Currently 30 million people live there. There are 17 million or 18 million of that 30 that are suffering from a very severe famine. Do they care about AI? Probably not. So what are the boundaries of the common good, ethics and the common good? Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic question. It came up a bit in the lecture yesterday too in the Q&A. Yeah, I think this is an area where Christians are going to start sounding increasingly radical. There is certainly a trend in the developed world, certainly a trend in the United States and China right now, to identify the common good with national boundaries and to have a very nationalist idea about what it is that the common good is that you should feel obligated to wake up and work for every day. I believe that the Christian tradition fundamentally rejects that, in part because we believe what we believe about human dignity, that every single person, regardless of their race or nationality or economic station, is made in the image and likeness of God, and on that basis alone has everything that matters at all for moral consideration and equality. And human dignity does not know any national boundaries. Facts about human dignity existed long before the modern nation state came to being. Facts about human dignity will exist long after our current economic structures crumble. and to take a kind of Christian perspective on who matters in the era of powerful artificial intelligence. Our commitment to human dignity is going to actually force us in really radical ways to be cosmopolitan in our outlook in ways that, again, are not in vogue right now in our current political structures. So that's just to say that I think not only is it possible for Christians as they approach what it is to be ethical in the era of powerful AI to consider those who are in less developed regions of the world, those who maybe have different kinds of economic concerns that are not being affected by AI. Not only is it possible for us to think about them, but it's actually incumbent upon us to think about them. And I do think we didn't talk too much about making guesses about Pope Leo XIV's AI encyclical, which I was kind of hoping we would do tonight, but there's a big album that's going to drop in the Catholic world sometime this year. The Pope has been thinking about the economic impacts of AI pretty profoundly, and nobody quite knows what's going to be in it yet, or if it's going to come out at Easter, if it's going to come out in October. There's a lot of speculation. I'm going to throw a drop party that you guys are all invited to. But there is a pretty strong hypothesis that Pope Leo XIV is going to advocate very strongly for thinking about South America and Africa and their access to computer chips and the dignity of developing countries who are trying to get the benefits of this extraordinary technology, but for various geopolitical reasons are being deprived of that right now. I think the Pope is going to say that that is a violation of fundamental human dignity. But we'll see. I don't know. We'll see what's in the album. He can do whatever he wants.
Good. Quickly on housekeeping. Yes, I was introducing others. I didn't introduce myself. My name is David Robinson. I teach on faculty here in Marketplace Theology and Leadership and direct an MA program for working professionals. In terms of recordings and slides, yes, the recordings will be available, video recordings through our website, and you can request slides through the email if you like. Maria, let's have a question from our online audience.
Yes, thank you. This question was sent in by Deborah. Given that AI is incapable of personhood or self-consciousness, how should we safeguard against engaging with AI from a relational I-thou context rather than just simply utilitarian or functional tool-based context?
Yeah, this is a great question from Deborah, and something me and my colleagues at the Institute for Ethics and the Common Good, I feel like we're talking about nonstop right now, is increasingly having the conviction that one of the biggest mistakes that we have made in recent history in developing commercial LLMs is giving them personalities. Like we actually did have a choice about whether we made OpenAI or Claude speak to us with affect or with the trappings of human speech or I-thou speech. And the companies they decided to do that. It makes the products very addictive. It makes them very good at dominating your attention. But we did not have to do that way. If we think of LLMs as a kind of glorified form of search, they could engage with us far more like a tool, like a card catalog than they currently do. And we have chosen to give them personalities. And I think that we're going to look back and think that was a really reckless decision. How individual users guard against this, given that the companies have decided to give us these, cars without safety belts, these emotional cars without safety belts. I don't know. I'd say discernment, making sure that you're, to quote my students, like touching grass with increasing frequency, like making sure that you're just not becoming absorbed in this kind of fake facsimile personality, but that you are still spending time with actual people, that you are aware that it is not a human, it does not have personality, it's just very accurately simulating it to you. But how exactly we navigate this before we have the option of a very powerful model that doesn't have these dangerous personal features, I don't know. I hope that one of the companies will realize that there's a market for developing safer AI that doesn't have this kind of personality elements, but I don't think that's coming in the near future.
Let's go to this side.
Hi, Dr. Sullivan. Thanks for your wonderful explorations over the last couple evenings. I'm Andrew. I'm an alumnus of Regent College. My question is, how won't we faithfully wrestle with the massive environmental destruction that's caused by AI data centers?
Yeah, this is fantastic. So one of the subtexts of the two lectures, maybe I can make it even more explicit, is that as a Christian community, we will absolutely reject utilitarian thinking about AI, which is very dominant in our culture right now, and it absolutely comes up in this issue of sustainability that you raise. There's a whole community in AI ethics that believe it is fine to pay the massive short-term quote unquote environmental costs, raising the carbon footprint of our entire planet, depleting water reserves, putting tremendous energy burdens typically on rural communities that are not used to having their energy diverted in these ways to create data centers. That all of these short-term immiserating environmental costs will be worth it if we develop a powerful enough artificial intelligence to forever solve climate change or to discover new forms of energy efficiency that have been previously unknown to the human race. So there's a certain kind of school of thought that says it's worth it to immiserate the next few generations of human beings and to take a big bet on the future of our planet in order to potentially extract some far greater environmental good from AI now. Then there's also the team of just the unethical capitalists who just say, like, that sounds like future kids' problem, and I just want to make as much money as I possibly can right now. Let's set them aside. Christians cannot accept the argument that we are able to sacrifice the environmental integrity of rural communities or our obligations to the collective efforts to reduce the carbon burden on our planet in order to achieve some greater good in the future. Because we just don't think about ethics in that way, of trading off some people with dignity's interests for a greater number of potential people with dignity's interests. That's just not an option for us. So this raises a great question that's a homework assignment for you, Andrew, and all of your peers at Regent College. What is the Christian environmental ethic for the era of artificial intelligence? Clearly, it's going to have something to do with the fact that people's homes are also an essential part of what it is for us to enjoy human dignity. Like, we were created to have homes, to be embodied not just in this body, but to be embodied in places that are significant to us and to our family members and to the people who came before us. And that is one of the ways in which our dignity is respected or not in society, and one of the ways in which our efforts can be humanizing or dehumanizing. And that should probably impose additional limits on what we're willing to accept now as far as the energy burdens we use to build AI without again, becoming totally Amish. But how to spell out a Christian environmental ethic that's as clear and directive as the utilitarian alternative, I think that that's one of the biggest problems that ethicists in the next year or two really need to take up. And so I think it's so grateful. I'm so glad that through some of the programs here at Regent, you guys are actually having an opportunity to debate this, because one of the most important things Christians, I think, can do for society is build an alternative to that utilitarian framework, which almost everyone is under the grips of right now.
Great. We have time for probably our last two questions here. Why don't we take them both in a row? So you can go first, and then we'll take yours, and then Dr. Sullivan can respond to both.
Hi, Dr. Sullivan. Just want to say I was a huge fan of your talk on the Veritas Forum.
Oh,
and I thought I recognized that name and voice. I lead a group of UBC students that go out on Fridays. We have signs, and we can say evangelize to the other students here, talk about the meaning of life and God. Imagine we're the Dr. Sullivan task force and we go outside the computer science building. First, how would you engage with students on this topic? And second, what do you want to be on our sign?
Oh my gosh, this is a great question. Repent. No. Don't do that. Don't do that. That's not good.
We're not trying that.
I think actually we talked about the economic shocks at the beginning of this talk. Our colleagues in computer science, folks who've been studying software engineering, they're really in the crosshairs of this economic shock. And I think for young people who are really excited about programming and coding and building computers, and who think that computers are beautiful and have been interested in this since they were young children and have been told until about 3 years ago that this was also kind of a golden career ticket, are now going through a sort of dark night of the soul, realizing that the contraction in the job market for software engineers is the most profound. Like that's been they've been the biggest area of displacement in the economy so far. So if I were you guys wanting to go sort of bring the gospel to the computer scientists, I would come with like brownies and a big hug and a kind of strength to reassure them that even if some of their material hopes for what their careers might be like in the near future are now feeling like they're slipping away. And you can't just change your interests in what you love on a dime. Like you can't suddenly decide you've wanted to be a computer scientist for the first 19 years of your life, but now it's fine, it's cool, you're going to be a counselor. Like, you know, that's a profound loss because work is such an important part of our good lives. I would come to them with a lot of empathy and also with the good news that, like, at the end of the day, Jesus is Lord. Like, Jesus cares about you. He has a great plan for your life. He never gives you burdens that you can't bear. And I think so many young people have to hear that message right now. And probably, you know, it's surprising to think that it'd be the computer scientists that need the most, like, just like the biggest embrace at the moment. But I would not be surprised if in the next year they're the ones that are kind of hurting the most.
Thank you.
I have our final question here.
Hi, Dr. Sullivan. Thank you very much for a stimulating lecture. I have two questions. You can choose which one you want to answer based on time. So the first one, we're talking about what does it mean to be human, and I appreciate that you're talking about capitalism, even though that you're not an expert in that area, you're in philosophy, but could you equally just transpose that to the family life, where just as a mother, right, we are actually raising humans. We're not just abstractly thinking about the concept of being human. We are raising a human. Can you talk about the ethics of that? And then secondly, embedded assumptions around what knowledge is in AI. What I didn't hear, and maybe if we had day 2, 3, and 4 of your lectures, we would, but with embodiment, we actually come to know through our bodies more than we do cognitively. And that, from an embryonic perspective, develops first. So can you talk about that as far as when we use AI, or even just Google as is, how we are trusting it to, trusting a certain epistemological framework without a larger, expansive questioning about it?
You're friends with Jens, aren't you?
Actually, we've never met.
Oh my gosh. Well, you guys are going to be besties. I'll answer your second question, which weirdly I find easier than the question of how to raise children effectively. I don't know. Go with God. I'm praying for you. It's going to be really challenging. The question of what makes human cognition different from machine cognition, and that frankly should have been, if we'd had a third Laing lecture, that would have been a fabulous, I think, debate or dialogue between me and Jens. This is something philosophers have thought about quite a bit, and I'll just give you guys just a fun thought experiment about what is special about human consciousness that we think machines will never be able to simulate. And we can debate it later if you guys want, but just to add another philosophical argument to your point that there is something very special about the way that we know the world that large data crunchers like LLMs will never have. There's this kind of famous thought experiment in philosophy called What Mary Didn't Know. All philosophy thought experiments are bizarre, so just go with me. Here's the setup. Imagine there was this woman named Mary, and she had spent her entire life locked in this black and white cell. And something was weird about it where her clothes were, she had black and white gloves, she had a black and white dress. She just never had access to any kind of color. And another weird thing about Mary is that she was really smart, and she was forced from a young age to learn absolutely everything about physics and color and light science. She just studied it to the point where she had encyclopedic knowledge. She had a computer screen that would kind of produce facts on the screen, and she would learn all this physics and color science, and she knew all of it inside and out. So she's like a genius on this particular topic. And then one day, somebody unlocks the door to her cell, and she walks outside, and she sees a red apple sitting on a table. Does she learn something by seeing the apple that she could have never known before she left the room. This is a sense which is a modern update of Plato's cave, in a sense. But there's this feeling, a lot of people have the intuition that, yeah, like there's something she learns when she leaves the room. It's not facts about redness or like the wavelength that creates redness, because she knew all that. But she learns what red is like what red is actually like, what it's like to see it and experience it. And that she couldn't have known before. You might think that's at least one of the many things that are really special about human consciousness, to Yen's point, that don't just make us like really sloppy data processors, is the fact that we are built to know what things are like. And AI is never going to have what it takes to do that. That is what it is to have consciousness, to have the kind of extra things that make us ensouled creatures rather than just, data crunchers. And I think it's a controversial thought experiment, but this is one of the many examples I think where we draw from, again, thousands of years of philosophers trying to answer this question, what is it to have a soul? To start to have reassurance, when we get confused about what AI can do, that there's something still essential to us that a capability it will never have.
Well, in a moment, we'll thank Dr. Sullivan again for this evening, but I have 3 quick final announcements. The first is that after the talk tonight, we're going to have Dr. Sullivan at the bookstore again, so you can pick up one of her fantastic books, The Good Life Method or Time Biases, and chat with her there. Also tomorrow, the final event in this Laing series, there's a lunchtime Q&A with Dr. Sullivan at 12:15 right across the hall here, so you're welcome to join us for that. And the final thing is, if you're itching now to write an expository essay in a Regent class, sign up for our summer school. There's information about that in the Laing lectures and on our website. It'll be good for your soul. Let's thank Dr. Sullivan one last time.